Welcome to Daddy's Podcast.
This is the Redefining Plastics Podcast. Welcome to the Redefining Plastics Podcast. My name's Justin Riney. Today, I've got an interesting one. We got Elayna Simmons, recycling expert, I'm going to call you. I'm going to give you the title expert. But Elayna came across my desk when I was looking through LinkedIn, and I saw a post about recycling is real. And it just hit me right in the feels. And it was exactly what I was thinking, but she said it better than I could. So I was really excited to connect with her finally. And now we've got her on. So Elayna, welcome to Redefining Plastics. And like I said, nothing to be nervous about. This is just a conversation between the two of us. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about your background, who you are as an individual, not just the business person.
Sure.
I want people to know who you are.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. My name's Elayna Simmons. I'm originally from Washington State, not Washington, D.C. And I got my degree in plastics engineering. And since then, have been working in the field of plastics. And pretty quickly in my career, started investigating waste and recycling, and how I've kind of migrated into the world of plastics recycling since then. And really have just tried to be all in since having the opportunity to work with recyclers. I think it's really exciting and fun and interesting, and I am always learning something new. And yeah, other than thinking about recycling, I'm currently thinking about the Appalachian Trail because I'm starting that in a little less than 10 days. And I'm feeling a little nervous about that, but not taking that on as a little adventure for about 6 months, and hoping to just spend some time out in nature and with myself and come back feeling refreshed to continue working hard in this industry.
So we talked when we did our initial introduction call, I guess, about the movie Wild. Did you end up watching that
I
movie?
haven't had a chance yet.
You need to, or find the book. The book's good too. It's a woman's self-discovery journey on the Appalachian Trail. Reese Witherspoon, really good. And I would be dead after day one, just to be clear, because I'm old and out of shape. But good for you. I would have done the same thing as a young person, but I'm not there anymore. But
a lot of people do it when they're retired too, so I would never say never.
Yeah, well, no, I'm going to say never. I got other stuff to do, but I think that's awesome. I don't think enough people really take the time to get to know what drives them, and what easier way to find out what drives you than to take on a huge challenge. And because 6 months of your life committed to anything, that's a big deal, because you're going to be going a long distance.
Yes, indeed.
And it's good for you. And you're doing it alone, right? Or you got a crew?
Yeah, well, I'm starting with a couple of friends for the first couple nights, but then after they'll go home and I'll keep going. And, you meet people along the way because, like, a lot of people start in the same place at the same time. So I'm sure I'll find a group of people to be with, but I do also want to spend some time alone and, learning more about myself like that. But yeah, you're right. Like, it's a huge challenge. And in doing it, like, genuinely part of me, like, I am still connecting it to, like, recycling in my career, because like all I think about is waste and recycling sometimes. And so in my head, I'm like, if I can complete this as like a personal challenge, I think I'll have that like confidence for whatever is next in my career to like really just take it on and go all in, and maybe even do something entrepreneurial in my future as well.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because typically after you do something like a career break like that, it's because you've got an idea of some sort, and you're mulling it over, and you're trying to figure out exactly what to do with it. So I think it's a good idea. I think everybody in the U.S. specifically, and I'll speak of that because that's where we are, and that's what I know. It's tough to spend enough time and downtime to really get to know what drives you. And I don't think enough people really focus on that self-discovery. A lot of people look at self-help but it's important to know yourself before you try to help yourself. This is the way I've always looked at it. And the one nice thing that I had is very early on, I was allowed to kind of figure out my own way and take time to do what I wanted. And I look back at that and say that that was a huge reason why I've been successful to any degree. So I'm a little jealous of you that you get to do that, but I'm glad you decided to join the call or the podcast because, like I said, I saw your post and I don't have it right in front of me, but you were, if I remember it correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were a little bit derogatory towards the recycling is real statement. And let me be clear. We both agree that recycling is real and that it happens and that it works. It was the messaging and the tone of the messaging and the way that it was presented that you had a problem with. And I agreed with you. I thought the messaging was wrong because I think if I remember correctly, the recycling is real logo was right in the middle of it was like a crowded cityscape.
Well,
and there was waste everywhere.
yeah. Well, so the context was this was at a recycling show, and some very conscious individuals wanted to take a stand against the plastics industry. And so they came to where there was like a networking event after the show, and they actually came and they had found that recycling is real marketing campaign, and they like made a little like twist to it and were displaying it like right outside where that networking event was happening, and which I thought was brilliant already. I was like, how do you buy this?
Yeah.
And
guerrilla marketing.
how did you find out about this? But their marketing was better than the plastics industry's marketing.
And that's where it was, and that's why I gravitated towards what you were saying, because I've been saying for 6 years now that we do a really bad job of marketing to consumers, specifically consumers of your generation. I can't say generation apparently, and I'm oversimplifying a generation, but I think there are some through lines for people that are younger than me and in the industry, because everybody's heard that recycling doesn't work, and they've seen pictures of trash on beaches. They've seen Photoshop pictures of the garbage patch in the Pacific, which when you look at it, it just looks like the ocean. But anyway, it's still a problem. Don't get me wrong. It's still a problem that we need to resolve, but it doesn't look like what people say it does. But I think we do not know how to connect with consumers. We know how to connect with each other. We're really good at selling to each other. I'm really good. The companies that I've ever worked for are really good at selling to big brands and convincing them to use polystyrene or polyethylene or whatever. But we don't talk to end consumers, and all they hear is microplastics in the brain, waste on beaches. There's more waste in the ocean than fish by 2050, which is, as far as I know, disproven. But that's the stuff that they hear every day. And then there are colleges that are shutting down their plastics program. And we talked a little bit about this in our first call, that a lot of those programs are shifting to sustainability now. So I am always shocked when I find somebody who is younger than me that went to school for plastics. Right. So how did that come about? Like why plastics? How did you end up there?
Well, I mean, for me, actually, like I had a background in like ocean science of all things, since I was from the West Coast. We liked the ocean out there. So kind of going from that into plastics was kind of an interesting step. But I chose plastics because I had such an interest in science, and I found that I had a real interest in manufacturing and just a passion for it. And in particular, I was very interested in medical plastics because plastics are very essential to our medical field. Yeah. And I thought it was great. I thought it was really cool and really wanted to get into that field. And so to me, like studying plastics was a way of helping other people. But through that program, I became fascinated with manufacturing. I became fascinated with the materials. And then in my first job, it was like my first real entry into an industrial setting, and seeing the level of waste at industrial scale like really kind of clocked me in the door. Like, okay, this isn't just, producing a product. Every time you produce a product, you're also producing waste. Like a lot of manufacturers have 10 to 20% waste built in because of the process. Some have much lower, hopefully, but it's just something that's a part of the industry. And so I really started connecting, my background of care for the environment and studying plastics and love of the industry to, okay, what are we actually doing with this waste? And like, is this across industry, and what are we doing with that? Right. So that's kind of where my passion got flipped on.
Yeah. And post-industrial stuff too. So all of that waste, it's a big deal. And I think the industry does a pretty darn good job of solving that end of the equation and finding homes for that. Because even when I got into the industry, there's a lot more waste that went to landfills. And now there's rarely that kind of waste that's going to landfills. Somebody can find a use for it. And it takes people to connect.
Absolutely. First company I was lucky enough to join at a time where they were starting an initiative to reuse their internal waste. And so I actually got to be a part of their project of installing their first Harima line, where they could then reprocess their waste and put it back into their own process, which I thought was great and really cool. And I've seen a lot of companies nowadays that have something like an Harima, or at least a shredding line, right, where they can reuse that PIR, which is great. I think that's must,
Yeah, most people can use it back depending on the product, right? You can use it up to 25% back. And if you're making a multi-layer structure, you can dump it in the center. Things like that. There are so many ways to reduce waste. But I'm curious, when you went while you're going through your college program, was it mostly focused on like sustainability? Was it mostly focused on engineering? Kind of where was that?
I think when I talked to my professors, because I like to stay connected with them, they said my year that I graduated was one of the last years that it was really not focused on sustainability, and it was really kind of that more traditional, like we're talking about the machines, we're talking about the products, we're designing products, we're making products. And then I think the year after they started implementing more of a sustainability focus. And that really it didn't even need to be a big shift, right? It was really just add a class or two and talk about it a little more when it comes to like your engineering ethics class as well, right? Including it in that conversation. But even that change and like telling the students that, this program is not just plastics, it's talking about the whole life cycle of a product and thinking about sustainability, it created a shift in demographic, which excites me because I was one of 2 women in my class, my graduating class, and now it's like over 50% women in that program, which is...
It's great. We need more of it.
Yeah.
We need way more of it.
I think so.
We need young people and we need young women. So we're 2 birds, 1 stone. I like that.
Yeah.
But so you're from the Northwest. Let's exclude the people that you went to college with, because we assume that they're okay with plastics if they're going through a plastics program. When you tell people in your age group what you do for a living, what is the typical response?
Well, I'm lucky enough that I can say to people, I work in plastics recycling, and they get before, I guess even when I was in my program, and my whole school was not engineering, it was just my one program. And so when I talked to friends outside of engineering program about my plastics degree, they were like, why? They were like concerned a little bit, right? And so I had to, start there even in college, explaining to my friends, like, there's, great things out there made of plastic. And, a lot of like the reason I wanted to be involved with it was for like medical tools and that kind of thing. So I don't know, it took some explaining, but it also took some recognition of like, okay, there's a really negative stigma here and we need to talk about it.
Yeah. And we do need to talk about it. I think we need to be talking to people all the time, and we need to listen
Yes.
more than we need to speak too. I think that's the other thing. As to be clear, when I tell people I work in plastics, so obviously my wife just recently passed. That's not the purpose of this conversation, but her best friend, when I first told her what I did for a living, she's like, "Isn't that just like working for the tobacco industry? You're killing people." I'm like, not this again. This same discussion. And it's over and over and over again, because that's what people hear and that's what people think. So I just find it curious that, that you're from the Northwest, you're in plastics, you're in recycling. Do you ever get anybody saying, well, recycling doesn't work? Why are you even trying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I think in the public, and like just friends you have outside of industry, which are most of my friends, you kind of get two kinds of people. You get the people who really like, they've heard the stories of recycling doesn't work and they'd kind of like quit a little bit. And then you have some of my other friends who want to believe that everything is recyclable. And they asked me one time, can I put my like old pots and pans from my kitchen and stuff like that?
God.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Like, I wish you could, right? But that's, it's like we need to, and this is where, I think about how do we actually start educating people about like what is recycling even, right? And even this concept of like the recycling is real slogan, right? And can go any number of directions here, but I guess like with my own personal friends, I think about they're probably not going to see that advertising anyways.
They won't,
and
because it's targeted to C-suite. It's not even targeted to consumers.
It's like it's on LinkedIn, it's to us, right? Like between each other. But for like my friends, I'm more like, you need to understand what recycling is in this city, right? Of like, what is our collection? Where is it going? What is happening to it? And so I tell all my friends they need to go on a MRF tour.
It's a good idea.
I think it's a great place to start personally, because you remember like the show How It's Made? And like we need that. Personally, I think if we wanted to actually like educate people, we should do those kinds of videos very specifically of like, how is waste handled as a concept, and not make it about plastics recycling at all, but just talk about what's happening in your city, right? Like, where is this waste going? Why does it matter to put it in a bag or not put it in a bag or whatever it might be, right? So
I'm going to challenge you a little bit, because I've been talking to the brave guys, so Mitch and Adam, about doing a video exactly like what you're talking about. I need a younger voice to do it.
okay.
Do you want to do that?
Put me in.
All right. See, and that's what I'm saying. This is the kind of collaboration, connecting with people and talking to people that are passionate about this system and want to improve it. Like, you joined up in the recycling world because you wanted to make it better, right? We understand that it is a decent system, but with the right connections and the right collaboration, it could be a great system.
Right.
And with the right investments and people, for the most part, we need younger, forward-thinking, data-driven people in the plastics recycling industry. So that is my biggest concern. How do we attract more people your age and even younger? Let's talk about like high schoolers, and get them interested in recycling and trying to make the world more sustainable. How do we get those folks excited about this?
Again, I think MRF tours, I think number one, like field trips, right? Like, can we still do those in school, like since COVID is over? But, like, well, I shouldn't say that. It's still out there. There's a lot of things going on right now. But the point is, field trips are a thing, right? Like getting kids out of the classroom to actually show them what's happening and talking about like the things that they're able to maybe purchase on campus, and like, is it recyclable? Where does it go? And like, even I know that there are like high school classes that are like engineering 101 type of classes, and like bringing up the conversation of, what you design into a product matters for the end of its life, right? Which maybe they're already talking about. I don't know. But I think that kind of thought process of really thinking about what you do matters in terms of like how you make something and then where it goes afterwards, and understanding the systems that we live in. And I think that's something that really, I think personally, I've always, since I was a high schooler, wanted to know, how does our world work, and like
I think you might be an aberration.
I might
though.
be, but I
Yeah.
know plenty of people, at least that in my high school and college classes, like, we are always complaining about like, why aren't they teaching us how to do our taxes in college or in high school instead of
Also a good point.
really.
That stuff needs to be
But it's that kind of thing of like, there's a lot of everyday things that we interact with as adults that we really don't know where it goes or what happens to it or how it works. And I think there's curiosity to be sparked there.
Well, can we spark curiosity when people's attention spans like 10 seconds or less? Like how do we do that?
Well,
And that's the difficulty, right? We're trying to express complex issues to a soundbite world.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to say plastic recycling is a fraud, because that's, people will read the headline.
Right.
They won't go beyond that. How do you say plastic recycling is real and prove it to people when now it's already ingrained in them that it isn't real, that it is a fraud, and they're only going to pay attention to a soundbite? How do we do that? And I don't know if you have an answer for that, because I sure as heck don't. And I'd love somebody to solve that.
Well, that's why I think my personal passion is like getting people into the real world. Because everything online is so easy to be manipulated, and it's very easy to consume things without knowing where it comes from or how trustworthy it is. And so to me, again, I'm like, if we can get people off their phones for a minute and into the real world and actually seeing how things work, I think that's going to be really impactful. But if you do want to make little soundbite things, I've seen some really interesting like TikToks out there that are like guys in the middle of the jungle taking a Sprite bottle and shredding it up and making like fishing line out of it or something random. Right?
Yeah.
Like
I've seen
that kind of stuff. Like I think that in itself even just like sparks that imagination of like, oh, you can reuse things. You
physically see it done. And and that's to your point with going to the MRF.
Yes.
Is you actually see it happening.
Right.
I think the difficulty with going on a MRF tour, though, depending on the MRF you go to, you're going to see bales at the end of it. And then you're going to just see storage, like warehouse full of bales. And you're going to say, okay,
what's next?
What happens to it now? So you almost need to do the MRF and then the reclaimer, and then you almost need to see it made back into whatever else it happens to actually see the full circle.
Yep.
And that's the difficulty. How do you show that to people in a way that's easily consumed?
Yeah. Have you heard of Precious Plastics?
I have not.
Okay, they're really cool. So this is an organization, a company. I'm not really sure how they define themselves, to be honest, but they set people up with basically miniature versions of plastic processing equipment. You can buy from them like a hand press injection mold or like a very small extruder and a shredder. And their whole thing is get like a local community center, maybe a high school, maybe like has a shop class still, hopefully, but I don't know if maybe still do.
Probably not.
But we need to start shop classes again.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, but we need to have I think that is a worthy investment by anyone in their community of like raise a couple $1,000s and get a mini extruder and shredder and have people bring in plastics from home and watch it go through the shredder, go through the extruder, make into a part. And then it's like, now it's real, right? So I love that company's out there because like there are a lot of little hubs like that. And if we can have something like that in a high school or college campus, I think that in itself could be a huge step forward in just like helping people to understand how these materials work even. They're really cool. I've known about them for a while, and it's been one of my like early ideas of like, how do I start something like this? Like do
Yeah.
a little bit of a community center with this.
Connecting people to these different groups that I talk to a lot of people, never heard of these guys. So
Where
I
I
think it's
know.
important to understand. Yeah. And that's why I like talking to different people,
Yes.
right? You learn something new every single time you talk to somebody new.
Absolutely.
Because everybody has a different, diverse background. They think about the world differently. And every single time I'm better for it. So that's why I'm going to keep doing this, because I just love it. But so I think, are you thinking maybe going into like a nonprofit type thing? It kind of seems like that's where you're leaning a little bit?
I think for me it might depend on what's available and out there, when I'm off the trail.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I think I want to really, like, personally, I want to be more involved in my community, and I want to encourage other people my age who I think really do have that tendency to isolate and be inside on their phones all the time and consuming media, to like get out of the house and do something productive and community oriented. And this is something I'm passionate about and would love to do wherever I end up after the trail, right? Is actually like, what if I set up a little shop, right, where people can come in and make a little plastic part out of their own trash? And then maybe they'll start to believe recycling works,
Yeah, because as long as you're involved in recycling in one way, shape, or form, I'm happy with that. So if you want to do nonprofit, if you want to do whatever, we need more people like you in this industry. So losing you would be a big problem.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not going anywhere unless somebody kicks me out.
Nobody's going to kick you out because you're going to be running this thing pretty soon. Because the nice thing about being young in the plastics industry is everybody else is old. You're going to be taking your pick of jobs because nobody else is doing these
I appreciate
things.
that
So,
vote of confidence.
yeah, I think there's so much that we can learn from different generations that I don't think we take enough time to sit and actually talk. Mainly because your generation doesn't pick up the phone if I call. It's all emails or texts. True. And it's a learned way of doing business. And I'm technically an older millennial, and there are a lot of generalizations about my generation too, but I don't fit into any of them because I don't know. I'm just an old soul, I guess. I'm more like a boomer. But you strike me as a bit of an old soul too, as somebody that's probably not like everybody else, which is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm still trying to put the pieces together on how plastics. But I guess the easiest way is I want to get your feedback. I ask the same question to everybody that comes on this podcast. What do you think of when you hear the word plastics?
Plastic or plastics?
Either.
Because I think there's a difference. Well, okay, maybe it should be, but
no, run with.
Yeah, because I think like plastic is thick. That's
fake.
That dissociation that society has taught us, right? Plastics. I don't know. I think of my industry and I think of all the cool things we can make with plastics. But I'm a plastics nerd, so what can you do?
So am I. What are you going to do? Yeah, you can fight it or you can just embrace it and start a podcast. That's what I chose. I can run from it as much as I want, but I like talking about packaging. I like talking about lightweighting. I like talking about how we can solve problems for people. And there's really no other industry that I've been involved in that allowed me to do that as much as this industry, because there's just so much happening. And at this point, there's so much negativity surrounding it. And for valid reasons in some cases, there's a lot of uncertainty about microplastics and what it does or does not do. And I think people are concerned about that, and probably rightly so. I think we need to be having more of a conversation about it. Not me, because I have no idea what a nanoparticle versus a microparticle is. So I'm the wrong person to have that discussion.
Sure.
But I think we as an industry need to have that conversation more because it's out there. It's in a vacuum right now, and there's only one side speaking to it.
Right.
And if we don't talk to it, they're gonna run our narrative for us. But do you have any thoughts on the whole microplastics thing? Does that concern you at all?
I agree with you in that the industry needs to take it more seriously because in general, like, you're right. Like, I do think there's a little bit of a generational divide, and that's not cut and dry. I've met people of all types of personality and age and industry who are either very concerned about microplastics or brush it off. Like, who cares? You know? And I don't think the who cares attitude is helpful. And that's kind of, I mean, it relates back to, you know, the post I made about the protesters that were at the plastic show last year. I think a lot of people there, you know, it's easy to walk on by, go to your event, ignore them, talk bad about them in the event, right? And just not think about it very much. And just say, oh, they don't know anything, you know. But
they're dumb. They're misinformed. They're whatever.
They'll call them dumb because they're like, oh, they don't know anything. But I talked to them, and like one of them was from the oil industry. Like, she used to work for a large company, and she became disillusioned because within that large company, there was not enough concern being given to environmental factors that she was a part of trying to help. So I, again, like this aspect of like listening to people, I think there are people out there that are educated and who have valid concerns, and not listening to them doesn't help anything, right? Because it's just creating more of a divide and more extreme thoughts, right?
Yes. That brings us to a whole different topic, but I definitely want to run down the divisions and just kind of the camps and the tribalism. It's like, you're here, I'm here. We can't agree on anything because I've got this team shirt on and you got that team shirt on, and we're never gonna find middle ground. It never used to be that way. That's the way it is now. And it's not just politics, it's everything. Everything is divided like that. And it's disconcerting to me because I look at when you stop and you talk to those people like you did, what did you learn? What did you gain from that discussion? I guarantee you picked up some insights. You figured out that, you know, the world is not exactly how you've preordained in your mind that it is. And you probably learned some things. And I think there are too many people that don't do that today. The amount of times people tell me to block what they consider to be anti-plastic trolls on LinkedIn, I'm like, no, I'm not going to block any of them. That's part of the conversation. If I want to be involved in this discussion, I have to be able to communicate with every single one of those people. And if I can't, that's on me. And it, you know, maybe they're not being genuine in how they're handling this discussion. Okay. I'm still going to respond, and I'm still going to stand up for what I believe in, because I truly believe, and I'm going to speak a little bit for you. You truly believe that recycling is a good thing. It's not the only thing. We need to be doing other things, but recycling works. It can work better. Maybe we can learn some way to make it better by listening to our detractors.
Right.
What do you think about all that?
100%. Yeah, because I think one of the biggest things is within the industry, you know, our industry is recycling in some ways. I mean, obviously we're also producers of the original material, but yeah, I think it's really easy for people within the industry to tune out like the average person who says, you know, wait a second, like, what about this? What about that? Right. And it's really easy to just shut them off and say, we don't need to listen to them. We know our recycling industry is doing what it needs to do, right? Or whatever it is. But I mean, I think there's a lot of valid points out there that, again, maybe we can't do it all within our own industry. But, you know, I personally, maybe because of my generation, like, I'm very much pro reduce and reuse right before recycle, right? And that's
Do you really need to buy this?
Exactly.
It,
Right.
it should be your first question
Exactly.
every time.
It should be. Well, yeah. And to me, because I'm in industry, I think, do we really need to be producing this? Like, we
a good question.
overproduce a lot. And
Okay, let's dig into that.
please, let's do it.
So, in your mind, how do we overproduce?
Well, so last year when I was at the Polyolefins conference as PE, there was a presentation from an olefins producer, and they were talking about building these new plants. And then we had a follow-up talk from someone in the more accounting industry talking about, here's the level of production from polyolefins, and here's the level of recycling. And at a certain point, there's no competition, right, for recyclers versus virgin resin, in polyolefins at least, right?
You're never going to get the cost
You're never
to even be on par.
Right.
So,
and that's why I think a lot of people within the recycling industry are actually pushing for like those actual resin caps, right? Because otherwise there's no way to compete financially. But beyond that, even just as a kind of common sense thing, you know, it's a difference of values, right? Of, do you want constant growth and you're going to build these plants that you've been planning for 10 years because you see growth in your future, or you might take into consideration the greater marketplace of, we're leaning towards recycling now, maybe we need to reduce, you know? Like,
yeah, and I think you're touching on an important point. And I think so if you look at growth charts, the growth in the plastics industry is on par with economic growth over that same time frame. So it's not like plastics is growing at some sort of exponential rate at the expense of something else. It's really just growing with the market. But what you're saying, and I think there's something to be said here, is that if we can't scale recycling and make recycling work well enough that we can start to eat into that, go beyond the 10% recycle rate, which is also a little flawed because it's all production and not just like not just packaging.
that's a statistic.
It's still not good.
To many friends.
It's still not. Yeah. It's not good enough. Our numbers, even if you take out durables, is still not good enough. We want it to be better, and we need it to be better. And that's what I'm trying to do, and I know that's what you've been trying to do. But I think the overarching discussion is, how do we get it to where brands and then consumers actually pay for the cost differential? Because if you want PCR, it's going to be more expensive. You can do PIR all day at a lower cost today. If it becomes, if from a marketing perspective, PIR becomes on par with PCR, then those costs are going to become more even. But if we don't have people that want to even pay for it, how do we solve that? Because the other option is you're going to move it all to paper. There's not enough paper recycling to pick up for that. So you've got a lot more deforestation. So there's a trade-off. So I said a lot there. There was a question in there somewhere, I'm sure.
Well, yeah. And I guess I could say, like, I guess to offer my perspective as someone of my generation, and I think a lot of people my age agree that in general, we feel that overconsumption and overproduction are both issues, and they go together, right? Like you said, market growth has been extreme, I would say, right?
You talk about it as market equals consumption. If you want to talk about it that way, say consumption growth has gone up X percent.
But there's also
then you have a point there.
Preemptive production growth, right? Because in the predictions of market growth, we produce more, and it's producing more than it's consumed, right? So you have polyolefins industry produces a lot more than is being consumed, and then they have to hold on to it until it's ready to be consumed. Like, this is just a part of this market, and it's why resin prices fluctuate quite a bit, right? It's because they will just produce, and then sell it cheap. And that's why I don't think that recycling will be able to compete no matter how much it grows, because you can always make more virgin plastic than you need.
Yep.
So, And yeah, if we're going to talk consumption, I listened to your reaction kind of video.
Oh, with my buddies from college? Yeah.
I thought I don't agree with your takes. And
Okay. And that's fair.
but
Yeah.
yeah, because I think again, and it's not just generationally, but I think in particular, my generation we've been taught from an early age about the fact that we live in systems. And maybe it's just me and my brain and how I work, but viewing it as we live in a world of systems and recognizing how brands make their choices, right, for their packaging, and how everything on the grocery shelf is designed so that it catches your attention to buy it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of psychology going into these choices that
I'm not going to disagree
Right.
with any of that.
So-
I think we've created an economy of consumers,
yes,
and we're not producing
Right.
really anything anymore. And I think there's been such a disconnect between all of this is connected, right? Like you were talking earlier about not seeing how these processes work and not understanding what goes into it. We're talking about people don't even understand how their food is produced. They don't understand how any of this happens.
Exactly.
And then they expect somebody else to take care of it when they're done with it. It's because they're going to throw it away. It's going to go into the trash. It's going to go into recycling. Whether it's wish cycling, if they actually check to see what's accepted, or if they're putting pots and pans in their recycling bin, they just think somebody else, that's their problem,
Right.
not mine. And we need to be more holistic. And to be fair to myself, my opinions have actually changed since I did that episode in a lot of ways, just from talking to different people. Which is the nice thing about doing these things is I learn and I grow as I have these conversations.
And thank you for being that kind of person, because there's a lot of people who are very staunch in their beliefs, and it doesn't help anything, right? Like, we need the old to learn. And yeah, but you're right. Like, we're in a throwaway culture, right? And I would say that's a lot of the world right now, but especially here, I would say it's so easy to buy something cheap, throw it away, and buy it again later, rather than buy something quality that lasts, right? And sometimes something that is made of plastic is quality and lasts, but a lot of the time we are designing from the start, right? It goes back to, where do we start with our design? And we're designing single use, we're designing throwaway. And on top of that, you have the statistic you brought up before in a different podcast, I think, about Gen Z is like the lowest rate of recyclers. And part of that could be because we're all living in apartments and not a lot of multifamily homes.
Also true.
Recycling access. So there's a lot of systems in place that could be changed to increase recycling rates, to increase our mindset of how we treat anything we touch, and if we're going to throw it away or keep it or recycle it, right?
And you're touching on another important point, which is another reason why I wanted to talk to you. You can weaponize stats very easily. You can take a stat and you can make it work for you in any argument. If you're smart enough, you can take a stat and make it work for you. And so you make a valid point that I didn't even think of when I did that. I don't even remember what episode that was on. It's probably been multiple, but I did not think of the fact that Gen Z doesn't own a lot of homes, and they don't maybe have access.
Or a lot of them are angry.
Recycle.
They want access to recycling because they want to believe that they can do something good for the environment and, not just be throwing things in the landfill. So I really do think that people want to recycle, at least my age of people. Like, if they haven't been so jaded yet by the messaging of recycling doesn't work, they want to do it, and they might just not have access. You could say that about people who litter on beaches and stuff too, right?
Yeah.
There's no return.
So I'll tell you the most common comment I get on YouTube videos is, don't you know that all of this material is just going to end up in a landfill? And it's always people that are younger than me that are saying that. So I got that probably 6 times last week, and I don't get a lot of comments on my videos. So all of them seem to be people saying that plastic recycling doesn't work and you should just stop trying to do that. But again, that's experiential. That's not I'm not looking at a data set. This is just my personal experience and what I've seen. So I think there's a lot to be gained from these kind of conversations, right? Because we can learn things like I've never even thought about the fact that everybody's in apartments if you're a Gen Z. So, and that's good. It's good that I now have a more nuanced view of something. Typically don't get into politics on these kind of things. So I'll just say it. I lean a little more right on a lot of fiscal issues, but I do not lean right on a lot of social issues. And so I kind of land right in the middle. So I don't wear really any team's jersey. So I don't feel like I have to fight to the death based on whatever the head of that party says. But I don't think that's typical in the US. I think it's typical to find your tribe and to fight to the death with your enemy. And they look at other political leanings, other social groups as almost enemies at times. And that's just the exact wrong way of living life in my estimation. And I may be wrong, but I think if we listen to each other, we can solve for so many problems that we're just not solving today because we don't take the time to listen to what somebody else is saying. And we're just waiting for our turn to speak. What do you think about that?
I think it comes back to how we consume media right now.
Yeah.
And it's obviously, we all know social media has led to polarization, but on top of that, the way that everything is given to us with an algorithm now, and we don't make a lot of choices for ourselves. So again, it goes back to, can we get out of the house to talk to real people?
Yep.
Because
Yes.
yeah, like when you have a real conversation,
Having real conversations.
you can actually.
I can meet somebody that I am opposed to in 90% of thought and have a conversation and learn something that can change my mind on something completely different. And you don't get that if you're not actually communicating. So there was, I don't do TikTok. I'm too old for that. But there was a video that I saw on something. I think it was on LinkedIn even, but it was a podcast video and it was a clip, and it was 2 young women that were running a podcast that was I think the whole point of it was like liberal. Like, I'm a liberal podcast. That was kind of like the purpose of this podcast, which I don't care about, do you? But they made the comment, why don't you ask your conservative friends about this? And they laughed. And I said, we don't have conservative friends because we can't do that. We can't have people that think that way and be friends with them. And I'm just thinking to myself, what a horrific way of going through life if you're not willing to talk to other people. Now, there are some people you probably should avoid. There are some people that have some very bigoted views on things and are just jerks. Okay, don't talk to them. But you can't just look and say, if that person's a registered Republican, I can never talk to that person. It's so dumb to me. And it goes both ways. It goes both ways.
Yeah. And that's, I think it's in pursuit of avoiding difficulty, because to have an honest conversation where you disagree with someone is very difficult. It would be really easy to just sit through the podcast and go, yes, I agree. Like, you're right.
It'd be really boring. It would be really boring.
That's what some people listen to that kind of stuff, right? Because it makes them
echo chambers.
Yeah, it makes them feel like I'm right, But that's why, again, we can live it back into anything here, but
that's the point of this. We can take it wherever we want. And that's why it's nice to do this, because then we can just talk about whatever pops up. I try to stay away from politics, but I think the politics side of this discussion actually
And it's
manifest
not
some of this other stuff that we've been talking about, because people are so bought into their thought processes and they're so focused on the me that they don't think about the
right.
we's ever.
Yes.
And the we is the most important part in my estimation, because if we're not thinking about how we can make it better for everybody, the world is never going to improve. And I think that we're just so stuck in that circle of one political party is going to get in power. They're going to do things their way, and it's going to be combative, and it's not going to be the way it used to be, where people work together to solve problems. And we have to change that. And it fits right into the recycling discussion. We need people to be involved. We need people that have heard their whole lives that it doesn't work to be involved. And we need those people because a lot of them have really good ideas on how to make things better.
Yes. It's
And they could solve these things for us if they want to get involved. But we have to show them that it makes sense. So all of this stuff fits together in my mind.
yeah. It's really easy to make assumptions about other people based on one thing that they say, right? And to say, okay, you're dissing plastics recycling, you must believe this and this and this, and we can't have a conversation. And it's like, that's not true. But you're right. I think people don't want to be confronted. They don't want to hear that they're wrong. They don't want to think about that they could be wrong. And so to even have that kind of conversation of asking a protester, why are you here? Please tell me what you care about, goes over people's heads, and they say, I don't want to talk to them, right? Like, screw them. And it's like, no, actually, if we talk to them, maybe we'll learn something, and maybe they'll learn something, right? So
you can change hearts and minds. It is possible.
I want to believe
it really works.
Yeah.
Honestly, I can't go any other way, because if I don't believe that, then so I've got 2 young daughters. If I brought them into a world where nobody's going to change their mind, I'm going to feel bad about that. Like, I've put them into a world that's much, much, much worse than the one I grew up in. And it is worse in some cases, but I got to look at the positives and say, but there's the opportunity to change. There's the opportunity to make it better. And that's what I want to do. And I think that's what you want to do. And I hope that's what my kids want to do when they're old enough to actually make a difference in the world. So yeah, we're all over the place, but that is perfect, because that's what I want to talk about. Because I think these kind of things matter. And I think for me, I want more people to be willing to have the hard discussions. Because if you aren't willing to have hard discussions, let's be really clear to anybody that's listening to this right now. If you are the kind of person that always looks for people that agree with you, you're never going to be successful in life. You are never going to go beyond what you do today, because all of those people that challenge you and make you think differently are the ones that are going to make you better in jobs, as a human, just in general. If you're not willing to be challenged and have people challenge and even if they challenge you, maybe it makes you better at standing up for what you believe in. That's great too. Like, maybe they don't have a great point and you still disagree with them, but you've been able to make a case for what it is that you believe in. That's great.
Yeah.
We need more of that. We need actual communication.
It gets people out of their heads. And you're right, like learning how to communicate what they believe and not being stuck copying and pasting what other people say online, right? But actually thinking for themselves and getting challenged on things, right? And it's important to be able to understand and learn. So
and you made a comment a little while ago about like kind of painting people with broad brushes. They think one thing, and so that way I assume they think these 15 other things. I agreed with you because I know I've done it, and I've done it recently. I had an episode where I talked to Lindsay Moran, who was great, by the way, from Nant Bio Renewables. It was a composting company, and I really like what they're doing. But she started talking about microplastics and why she got out of selling plastics and how she wanted to make different choices in life. So I automatically assumed she was going to come at me with well, let's ban all plastics. So I said that, and I put words in her mouth, and she looked at me and she said, don't put words in my mouth because that's not what I said.
Yes.
It's like, you know what? You are 100% right. I should not just assume that this is where you're going to go. And I think too many people assume the way conversations are going to go or the way people are going to be, and they're not willing, which is weird, right? Because there's been a huge push for diversity. And I know that's kind of a tough thing right now because like the knee jerk in the other direction, the anti-DEI stuff. But there really has been a huge push to diversify companies, people, thoughts, whatever. And when you talk about these things, if somebody has a different thought, that's a good thing. And that's why companies want diversity, right? And but in your personal life, when somebody has a different thought than you, then you're immediately on the defensive. Say it makes no sense. It's like you're just getting what you're asking for, and now you want to run from it. And so, we're way off plastics at this point. But
we can cut all this. We can
no, we could. I honestly think this is informative. I think this all fits together, and I think if we don't look at the world holistically, we're going to make the same choices, and we're not going to grow. We're not going to be any better.
Well, yeah, and I didn't have a thought about plastics specifically, or about the holistic approach, right? I think a lot of the times the plastics industry is targeted for a lot of messaging when it really is like, I don't know how to say this, but like,
you want to say brands? Is that what you were going to say?
I say brands. Brands and
I agree with you.
Food companies, right? Where it's like, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole. I was going to talk about like globalization of the market as well. But
you can go down the rabbit hole if you want to. If you're comfortable going down the rabbit hole, go right ahead.
I think
I'm all for it.
I think something that like in like my personal life and in general in the public, right? Things that get brought up a lot is like, okay, why is this piece of fruit packaged in plastic? It never needs to be packaged in plastic. And
why is it chopped up?
Yes,
and then put in a thermoform?
And
that shouldn't happen.
Convenience culture and looking for something new to sell and meeting needs that shouldn't even exist in the first place, right? But like my go-to is the cucumber that's wrapped in plastic, the English cucumber, which is a superior cucumber. And it's actually like tastier than the other ones that we normally get. But it's one of those ones that like was my own thinking of like, we never used to have this cucumber in the stores when I was a kid. And we do now. And the argument that always comes up, always on LinkedIn, is someone saying, why do we wrap this cucumber in plastic? And everyone in plastics is like, it's preserving the freshness of the cucumber. It's better this way. We're helping solve food waste. And I'm like, okay, but we didn't have to ship this cucumber around the world to begin with. But like,
it's a valid point.
Right? So it's like we're almost like creating a problem to solve sometimes because it's a new product to sell.
Well, you started running down globalization a little bit. You almost have to ship some of this stuff around the world, though, because certain countries can't produce their own food.
Right.
So that's a different argument than what you're saying, though.
But like here in the U.S., we don't need a cucumber from England or wherever it's being produced. But
food waste is a big problem, though, right? Like if the consumer culture, like that apple has one little color spot that I don't like, so I'm not going to pick that one up. And then that one gets tossed. And that becomes methane in a landfill because it's not being composted properly like it should be, like nature would deal with it. That's the way it should be handled, but it's not. So we're just making a bigger problem because I think in a lot of cases in the U.S., we do overproduce some food.
Yes, we do.
And we don't need all of that. And so if we're going to do that, we should probably keep plastics in that equation so we can make it last longer. But do we really need to make as much as we are? But then eventually somebody's going to come back and say, well, you're not thinking about the starving kids or something like that. And like, okay, this isn't a thought out discussion. This is like popping into my head as we go. I'm not prepared for this discussion in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, it's like these are the kind of things that I think if we look at things from the bigger picture, we're much better for it rather than just my myopic view of the world. This is what I see every day. This is what I read.
Right.
X or Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now says this is the way I should think, and so that's the way I'm going to do it. And like, no, let's read a book every once
Oh my
in a while.
gosh.
Let's talk to
Imagine
somebody.
reading a book.
I know.
No, you're right.
I got
Yeah, because it's very, very easy to jump to why is a cucumber wrapped in plastic, and then from the plastics industry perspective, it's very, very easy to jump to we're solving food waste, and then it's like there's more to this conversation. That's really the.
it is not just black and white.
Yes.
There's more to it than that. There are shades of gray on both sides. And I do think that plastics is great for preserving freshness and keeping more food out of landfill. I will say that. But sometimes, do we need to ship this stuff, to your point, halfway around the world?
Or not a cut up cucumber in a plastic jar.
Yeah. I forget where I saw it. I think this was also on LinkedIn. And there was this very self-serving English woman who was just very impressed with the sustainability efforts that she was going through. And the only part of it that I agreed with was that she was saying, I'm not going to eat anything that was not grown on this island. And she lived in the UK. Because I don't see the purpose of shipping a mango from there to there. And you know what? I'm going to give up some things.
Yes.
Because I'm not going to do that. Because I'm thinking about my carbon footprint to that extent. There's something to be said to that point of it. The rest of it was patting herself on the back because of how great she was as a human, which I could not stand at all. But that part of it, I was like, okay, I see what you're doing there. And I agree with that in theory. But it's when you start thinking like, look, I'm saying all the things that the algorithm is going to love, and it's going to make it so some plastics guy in the US sees it, and then he's going to talk about it on his podcast in a couple weeks, and then it's just going to blow up even more.
The algorithm give it to you because you engage with these people instead of blocking them.
I know. I learn more because I talk to people that really don't like plastics and probably don't like me. Well, and that's perfectly fine.
And I just think, I really think like it's about expanding the conversation, right? And making it not just about plastics. It's about all packaging. It's about food waste. It's about what are we sold and what are we convinced to buy that we don't need. And we should do another field trip to landfills as well. And people should be educated on how does a landfill work and how does recycling work and how does composting work. And
it's a big video. We're talking like an hour long.
We're having multiple videos.
We got like 7 stops.
This is multiple videos. And then,
all right.
But yeah, I mean, people need access to these systems, and
so you're gonna have to keep me in the loop then for when you actually get back off the trail, so we can get you to narrate all these things for me. Because I get sick of hearing the sound of my own voice on these videos. I need somebody else to do it. But I give everybody the opportunity because we've been talking for an hour and 5 minutes now. But I give everybody the opportunity to talk about anything that we haven't covered today, that maybe something that you're really passionate about, that you wanted to bring up, maybe a cause that is a big deal to you. I know wherever your mind takes it, you can run with it. If you don't have anything, that's fine too. We've talked for a while.
Well, we've been talking about everything I'm passionate about. So, I don't know. If anyone wants to follow my blog while I'm on the Appalachian Trail, I have a blog. And if you want,
we'll get that in the show notes too.
And check out Precious Plastics. And if you have a community near you that you want to do more recycling, you can invest in your own mini extruder. And if you want to do more in your personal life to be more eco-conscious and think about what you're buying and where it comes from.
Elena, this has been an absolute blast. So I really appreciate you jumping on, and I wish you well and safety on your hike. I'm sure you're definitely going to be able to handle yourself. But if you were my daughter, I would be very concerned. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm sure you've gotten that from other people.
Everyone wants to know how I'm going to protect myself.
Well, I'm sure you'll be fine, but I'm just saying. Thanks so much, and I really appreciate it. This has been the Redefining Plastics podcast. My name's Justin Riney, the guest, Elayna Simmons. Have a great night. You want to learn more about the plastics industry, recycling, check out these other videos, please like and subscribe.